So far this year, there have been a ton of rumors coming out about upcoming Apple Silicon products, but we've only received one actual new Apple Silicon Mac, and that is, of course, the redesigned iMac, which is great, but it doesn't bring anything new to the table performance-wise and internally. However, things should soon be changing, and today I wanted to talk about the peak of Apple's transition to using their own processors, the Mac Pro. There's been a pretty steady trickle of information coming out over the past couple of months, so for today's video I synthesized the existing reporting that we've seen, as well as talked to some industry insiders and some leakers, and I worked with talented render artist Ian Zelbo to come up with some absolutely stunning concepts for the next generation Apple Silicon Mac Pro. And today, we're going to talk about it. Today's video is sponsored by Mech Arena, a tactical, team-based 5v5 shooter that lives in a sweet spot between casual on-the-go fun and skill-driven competitive gameplay. If you love the idea of hopping into a match with your friends, blowing up some robots, and being out in 5 minutes, this game is gonna be a blast. Get it? A blast? Okay, I'll see myself out. Mech Arena features a ton of mech loadouts, each with special, unique abilities suited to different playstyles. You also get a huge amount of weapons to unlock and upgrade, as well as endless customization options with cool skins, interesting and unique paint jobs, as well as combinations of all of the above. If you want to play short sessions while you're waiting for the bus, you can hop into a quick solo match, or you can play with your friends against other teams from around the world. You can also set up custom matches to play with your friends, against your friends, with whatever settings you want, on whatever map you want, and with no limitations. Mech Arena is currently preparing for its worldwide release in August, but if you're in the US, Canada, the UK, or some other lucky country, you can get started right now for free on Android and iOS. If you use the link in the description below, you can get a head start on the competition with 1 free gold crate, 15,000 credits, and 200 A coins. So get started today by checking out the link down below, and now let's get back to the video. So first off, let's talk about the methodology. This video is not an exclusive leak. This is a concept video based on my discussions with leakers, people that help work with other leakers, and also existing reporting, and a fair bit of speculation by me and Ian Zelbo to come up with these final designs. Now, when we're talking about a Mac Pro, these are Apple's Halo products. This is the most powerful, most expensive Mac that you could buy. And so when the design for one of these things changes, it's a big deal, and it takes a long time to get that process moving. I mean, just look at the Trash Can Mac Pro. It came out in 2013, and it didn't get changed at all until 2019, 6 years later. Before that, the Cheese Grater Mac Pro design is even older. It came out first in 2003 under PowerPC, received some minor changes to the port layout in 2006 when Apple switched to Intel, and then apart from that, the design kept going until 2013. It was a 10-year design. So when I hear people saying, oh, don't buy the Intel Mac Pro, it's about to be discontinued, they're moving over to Apple Silicon, I have to say, no. There is no indication that the Intel Mac Pro as we know it today is going anywhere anytime soon. Keep in mind, we're talking about the biggest, most expensive, most powerful product. That means that it's sort of in a category of its own. It doesn't follow the same rules as other Apple Silicon products. Number one, the people that shop for Mac Pros don't tend to upgrade on a 3 or 4 year cycle like many consumers. These are often decade-long devices for people, especially nowadays. Number two, pros might not be able to make the switch to Apple Silicon as easily as you or I, and Apple is well aware of this fact. And finally, number three, Apple Silicon simply isn't as powerful as a fully loaded Mac Pro. That's not a knock on Apple, that's just the state of technology. So it's gonna take a while before Apple Silicon is competitive with the $54,000 Mac Pro anyway. So when you look at those three factors together, what that tells us is that the new Mac Pro with Apple Silicon is most certainly not going to replace the Intel one. Rather, it will be an additional product. And that means that it's going to be targeted slightly differently. So based on my discussions with insiders, there are potentially multiple designs that are still in testing for this Mac Pro. Remember, unlike the upcoming MacBook Pro, which we know quite a lot about, this Mac Pro is still probably a year or more out, so the design hasn't been finalized. Basically, what I've come to see from these conversations is that there are two main designs that are going around. One that uses a very similar chassis design to the Intel Mac Pro, so those rails, the stainless steel rails that make up the structure of it. And then another one is sort of doing away with the stainless steel rails, which cuts costs pretty significantly. And that's the design that you guys have probably heard referred to as like the G4 Cube throwback. So without any further ado, I present to you the Apple Silicon Mac Pro concept. This particular design is similar to what John Prosser had talked about a couple of months ago, basically 3 Mac Minis on top of each other. Granted, the footprint is a little bit larger, but overall, I absolutely love this thing. It's adorable. It features all of the same motifs as the Intel one, the black Apple logo on the side, the holes on the front, even the same design for the port cutout on the back, but it's just so tiny. I love it. But this wasn't the only concept that we came up with, because apparently Apple is still playing around with multiple designs, and it seems like one of the other ones could be basically, I guess you could think about it like a mini ITX version of the full-size Mac Pro. So think smaller footprint, smaller volume, but generally very similar design language. Now, the way that we came up with this next design was based around the fact that Apple would be using the same chassis. So the stainless steel rails make up the whole frame and structure of the Intel Mac Pro. And so that concept, in conjunction with the miniature next to the full-size Mac Pro, gives us an idea of where these things fall. This really shows you how small the G4 Cube Mac Pro concept is. It's almost exactly half the height of the full Mac Pro, but the middle one is sort of a hybrid, right? You can see what I mean when I say it was like a mini ITX version. It's a little bit shorter and a little bit less deep, but it's the same width. All of our concepts are, in fact, the exact same width, and that, I think, is something that is likely to be a constant factor, especially if Apple wants to continue using the front hole design. But another thing to keep in mind is that with Apple Silicon, it simply doesn't need to be as large, not just due to cooling, but also due to expansion. The Intel Mac Pro has a lot of empty space on the inside, those MPX modules, as well as adding, people put in hard drives. There's a ton of PCI expandability, but with Apple Silicon, with a different niche of the market targeted, prosumers, it's pretty likely that we wouldn't have that same level of expandability. But, and this is a key one, we're not ruling out expandability. When I was talking to Michael NTFTW, who's a guy who knows a ton of insider information and has worked with a bunch of other leakers, he said that that is probably not the case. Keep in mind, this is all still really early stages stuff, but it's possible that Apple is working on not only dedicated GPUs, which we've seen reported a couple of times, but also potentially an upgradable RAM module. Now, this one is definitely a little bit speculative. Michael really isn't sure about the details, but given the fact that Apple knows their prosumers need upgradability, he says that it's possible that there could be a removable side hatch with upgradable modular components. That could be really interesting. Maybe Apple wouldn't use off-the-shelf components like RAM modules you can get on Amazon, but could sell their own RAM upgrades that you could install later. They'd be proprietary, kind of like the SSDs that they used for a while, but you'd be able to upgrade them. This, I think, would make a lot of sense because, for one, Apple can still make money off of those upgrades, right? Apple would never say it, but a big reason why they don't want upgradability is because they want you to pay them $200 for 16 gigabytes of RAM, because they're insane. So if they could just charge you that after the fact, maybe they would still be okay with having some upgradability. Basically, the way that we've come to see Apple's future Apple Silicon roadmap is the M1X, right? That's sort of our foundation. 8 high-performance cores, 2 efficiency cores, and then 16 or 32 GPU cores. And the future processors that come above that are 20 cores, so 2 M1Xs, and 40 cores, 4 M1Xs. It seems at least highly probable that Apple would do a chiplet design, kind of, right? They'd basically be combining multiple M1Xs onto a die rather than coming up with a whole new organization for it. This is also why I think we're cutting down to 2 efficiency cores, because if you're going to be combining multiple of these chips on a single die, why would you want like 30 efficiency cores? That's kind of pointless, right? So in the 40 core variant that we've heard a lot about, it would be 32 high performance cores and 8 efficiency cores. Granted, 8 efficiency cores is probably unnecessary, but from a manufacturing standpoint, it makes sense to combine multiple other dies rather than having to completely redesign everything. But where this gets complicated is when we talk about the dedicated GPU, because with our various designs that we came up with, we kind of kept the back layout the same, and so it still has the PCI slots. That's mainly because we don't know what there would be there instead. Potentially, if Apple were to develop a GPU, it could be an additional thing. When we talk about that 40-core Apple Silicon CPU, it's pretty conceivable that with 128 GPU cores, some people probably won't even need additional graphics horsepower. So it's possible that the modularity that we were talking about could be basically add a graphics card later. Also, how Apple would it be to have a GPU be an additional component that you have to pay for? That's so them. After all, we are talking about the company that sells a $6,000 Mac Pro with an RX 580 as its graphics card. So given these design concepts, plus what we're hearing about the Apple Silicon roadmap, the big question is how Apple decides to handle upgradability, because that has big impact not just on the price and performance, but also on the design. Because if you look at the G4 Cube Mac Pro concept that we came up with, it's very easy to imagine a way that that could exist without any upgradability whatsoever. So think of it like this, right? You have your power supply built into it. You've got a single board with the SoC that's basically just a gigantic die with 40 cores on it. And then above that, you basically just have a big-ass heatsink with a big-ass fan on the front, and there you go. Whereas, on the other hand, if Apple does decide that they want to develop custom RAM modules, custom CPU modules, who knows, custom GPU modules, then the Mini ITX case design might make a little bit more sense. You might be able to have some of that layout that Apple has in the Intel Mac Pro, and maybe it would make more sense with that upgradability as the main feature. Okay, now I've got one more thing that I thought of that's totally out of left field, totally wild, but not impossible. So as we've heard about these 20 and 40 core Apple Silicon chips, what if they're not a single chip? What if this design could feature multiple processors? Like the old school cheese grater dual Xeon Mac Pros, right? What if you're essentially having an M1X, 2 M1X, and 4 M1X, and then it's modular? Could you imagine how awesome that would be? Because let's say, hypothetically, right, you pick out your base Mac Pro, 20 cores, right? Then you say, I want to add a dedicated GPU so I can focus more on compute tasks. Or you say, no, I'm not super interested in that. I'm going to buy the upgrade module, and go to 40 CPU cores, and you could do that yourself. Could you imagine how awesome that would be? Obviously, that's technology that we have not heard anything about, and this video, which is already a concept video, has just suddenly taken a turn into science fiction, but holy moly would that be amazing. So currently, as things stand, it seems pretty likely that we'll be seeing 20 and 40 core Apple Silicon CPUs within the next year or two, and it seems almost certain that we're going to be getting MacBook Pros, Mac Minis, MacBook Airs, as well as a new larger iMac and this Mac Pro within the next 2 years. So whether or not it looks like the concepts that Ian and I came up with today, it's absolutely insane that we are on this huge turning point in Apple's history. This is really fun to be around. I hope you guys had a lot of fun talking about these concepts. Let me know which one was your favorite and what you think the next Apple Silicon Mac Pro will be. And with that, I will see you all in the next video.